Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation to Zumtobel, Mr. Zumtobel, Mr. Schumann. As a short introduction, so how do I come to Bregenz? What's my role here? I'm not talking so much about light alone, but I want to describe to you, I want to present and confront you with a few realities that might look exceptional to you, but they're actually the reality, the daily life and reality for the larger number of people. And obviously, most of them, the ones that I'm going to present you, they're living at a tropical belt around the globe, largely called the global urban south. So we're talking about cities, and we're talking about cities that look increasingly asymmetric, for some people surprising, but as you will see in the course of this presentation, it's actually a deliberate asymmetry that we have produced, and I would say light only makes sense, and that you will only see light if you also see shadow. And I think we have to understand both sides of that in this increasingly widening horizon where we have actually less and less containment. You understand the idea of west and east, of north and south, is deteriorating. We're looking at the whole world, at the whole globe as a single entity. And that also means that we have to be courageous, that we have to take responsibility, that there are challenges, opportunities, but it also takes commitment. And I'd like to tell you a bit about Alfredo and my work. I'd like to tell you about this increasingly larger horizont, the Gran Horizonte as we call it, about the 24 hours that people live in that. You know, in the tropics, actually it was a perfect introduction. Olafur, thank you. Going from Iceland, from the very north into the equator, you have day and night at a pretty distinct moment. 6 o'clock, nightfall, very quick, no long sunsets, no lovers sitting in the Bregenz lake looking over the sea. It just gets dark, like you switch off the light. And that actually means that there are people in those cities, and some of them, they have light, and others they don't. Again, it seems like it's an accident of our economy, of our history. It is also an accident of decision makers, because I can tell you 15 years ago, when Christian and Hans-Jürgen in Aedes Gallery showed our work the first time, very few people were talking about the explosion of the cities in the south. Decision makers, architects, urban planners have not taken that challenge on. I myself, born in Austria, I went to New York to study urban design, because you cannot study urban design in Austria. In a few places in Europe you can. But I can tell you, you will only understand cities if you really live there. And I'm going back a few years. It was 1975. This is a magazine that I saved from that time. It's out of print. It was called Scala magazine, The Future issue, 1975. I was 10 years old, I saved it, because I want to see if this future is real. Because this was the vision of the year 2015. And as you can see, our cities more or less maybe look a little bit like that, but they only show a segment of cities, a segment of people. Driverless cars, you see we're a little bit behind, about to break through, but we still don't have it. I'm missing urban qualities, I'm missing people. You know, they almost look like cynical caricatures of themselves. What we have gotten, and this is our reality today, is on the one hand side that's actually a picture from Lagos, or is it I might not be sure, there should be actually a picture title showing up, Lagos, Nigeria, and Kibera, Nairobi. And you see two versions of urbanizations. This is on the left, the urbanization that you probably see in high glossy magazines. This is what real estate agents sell to politicians. This is how to develop land. And in the process of urbanization, you produce not only wealth, accessibility, possibilities, but you also produce, and this is a byproduct, inevitable, you produce poverty. Kibera, Nairobi is on the other side. And this can range from a minimum of 10%, that is what you still have in Europe or the US, or a maximum, I would say Caracas, Venezuela, this is where we started our think tank, you have roughly 60% of the people in the city living below poverty level, which is measured by less than $2 a day of income. So whatever you do, you will produce 10 to 60% of poverty. And that also means 10 to 60% of people who have no access to certain services that you all take as granted. So I like to suggest for you for this presentation, put yourself in this story that you go home, that you try to switch on the light, but there is no light. You want to sit down and watch television. There is perhaps a television, but there might not be electricity. There might not be water coming out of the water tap. You're living actually in a sort of an autistic environment where you yourself have to suggest, where you yourself have to produce your own infrastructure. People become infrastructure. This is an interesting notion, in particular, if you think about that we ourselves at the ETH Zurich, we are actually entertaining laboratories. In Singapore, for instance, also in the tropics, and we're looking at higher-end developments of what is possible in an environment like Singapore. And you see studies of possible skyscrapers, production methods. This is robotic building, Gramatiocola. We're trying to figure out how those future cities can look like in small scales, in measurable ways. But what we don't know is how to translate that knowledge into the real world. And that's actually, we heard about it already, this is not only a challenge for companies, it's also a challenge for politicians. This, for instance, is a picture during Hurricane Sandy taken by Ivan Ban from a helicopter of Manhattan, and you see where the light was shut off. An energy crisis triggered by a hurricane left downtown Manhattan. You see the new replacement of the World Trade Center. Midtown with light, the rest, Chinatown, East Village, West Village is without a light. And you see the same in Bangkok at floods. Lower income areas are flooded, higher income areas are not flooded. There's a sort of a question of resources and accessibility. And I would actually suggest, think about light as life. It's your lifetime. If you sit in a dark room, your lifetime is actually shortened. I think we already heard a number of examples. If there's no light, that you read a book, that you learn, that you continue your work, your lifetime is literally shortened by those hours. And I like to suggest also with this image that there's no average anymore in cities. We still look at countries, at cities, at average incomes. You know those lists of GDPs and country comparison. We cannot use them anymore because today, and this is again the rule, not the exception, you have in the same city wealthy and highly wealthy people and very poor people living next door, sometimes only separated by a brick wall of 25 centimeters, by a fence or by some electrical circuit area. So we were interested in South America, but even South America is a story for itself. It's far away, it exists in your imagination, but hardly anybody has an idea about it. So I like to introduce you along the size of South America. From the border of Tijuana and the United States down to Tierra del Fuego, it's the same distance like from the North Cape down to Cape Town. This is 6,000 miles, and it's a huge territory. And South America, in comparison to Africa and China, and we hear this every day, 50% urbanization, South America is already 86% urbanized. So what politicians, architects, and urban planners have actually not observed has actually already happened in South America. And this is why it is for us an interesting benchmark. And you probably all know Alexander von Humboldt and his assistant Bonpland, standing here more or less for Alfredo and myself, going into this terra incognita at the time. A terra incognita that was unknown, the first privately financed expedition where people tried to find out what this unknown territory, this unventured territory is actually about. Still 100 years later, on the left you see my father-in-law, Kai Rosenberg and Lothar Baumgarten. Since still 100 years later, people ventured into this terra incognita. inspired by Claude Lévi-Strauss, by the Triste Tropique. You probably know his book, an anthropologist, just like my father-in-law, who went into the jungle to live with the Yanomami in the field to figure out what this world, this unknown world, is about. I can tell you our unknown world today, paradoxically as it sounds, are actually cities. Most people live there, but very few people have an idea, an imagination, available data, how to deal with it. We work by trial and error. If it works, fine. If it doesn't work, we build another city next door. We move, we are like nomads in our own city, and you can see this in your own lifetime, how areas in your city, in your hometown, have been more or less attractive, have been going down and moving up again, and we don't know really enough about it. So I saw my first Indian actually in Caracas, right in the middle of the city, begging for a few coins. And this is actually a picture that should remind us that this is not something that we can delegate or relegate to some distant place. We are confronted, also you here in Bregenz, you're confronted with those images because everybody who lives in cities has somehow, in some ways, something to do with each other. We heard earlier that people used to use petrol to illuminate their rooms. Actually, it was gasoline and petrol originally. The production was originally for illuminations, not for transportation, interesting enough. And Venezuela is indeed this place which is the #1 reserve of petroleum, but despite this wealth of energy, it has also a permanent energy problem. There are shutdowns, water, electricity, etc. And the suggestion here of our good friend Eric Hobsbawm, The Age of Extremes, that our future will be about sharing, is already a step closer. Just like my magazine from 1975, I think we're entering in this area, and you all should know that it was actually Eric Hobsbawm who first came up with this idea, with this notion, with this Feststellung that we have transferred from from a rural into an urban society, not into a society that lives in cities, because you could say it doesn't matter anymore if you live in a city. For people who live in a barrio, in a slum, they don't have the convenience of a city, but they still have an urban lifestyle for many reasons, and I would like to show you, together with this wake-up call, a few examples, a few projects that produce insight, but they also produce reaction, physical projects, answers, because it is not enough to only search and research and find more data. The reality is that despite more data, we're increasingly having problems to know what to do on the next day. We don't know it. If you ask many of your competitors, and maybe you're a step ahead because you have a lot of good and concrete ideas, they would like to go into new markets, they would like to be there, but they have no idea what to do on the next day when they get up. It's getting more and more complicated. So wake up, because in Venezuela, in Caracas, in most cities, there are actually two societies, two economic systems, two, maybe three, a variety of lifestyles. And we have to figure out how science and technology and the policy making, the actual transfer of this into the real world makes sense and makes a difference. So places like this, like Petare, are not replicated over and over again. And you will remember this presentation perhaps if you go and you see in a few years the new cities that are coming up, like the ones that I showed you earlier in Kenya. We are replicating this sort of urbanization. There are no architects involved. 90% of cities are actually built by non-architects, by non-planners. And a project that we're currently entertaining in Shenzhen has led us to a lot of discussions with the city planning authority, and they're permanently outmaneuvered by the realities. They plan a city for 4 million people, and it turns out it's a city for 12 million people. So this is really, I would say, not smart city planning, but what we need is less stupid city planning. And I like to show you for this example also another map of a city mayor in Caracas. What is very small printed here is Zona Verde. This is what the man operates with. let's say until 10 years ago, and this is how it really looks. There are about 200,000 people living alone in the northern section of Petare that were simply not accounted for, and for the same reasons, they had no accessibility neither to police stations, post offices, any other public services. They were left on their own, if you want so, but they learned also to survive. And just like in Caracas, here from 49, switching to 66 and into the recent past, those areas are actually expanding on top of territories that were not slums. And I would say, talking and thinking about light and an industry, it is not only about new buildings and new houses and new cities. Cities are actually a permanent process. There is no finished city. Maybe a ghost town is finished, but finished forever. All other cities are permanently transforming, and you will see walking through your favorite area of your city, of your hometown, maybe the inner city of Bregenz, the old city, that there have been actually generations of renewal, also infrastructural renewal in the same buildings. This is again also not a static result, but a process that we have to learn to deal with. So let's go back into Caracas. Here we are, just the sun is going up, and as many of the challenges that I'm mentioning here have urbanized, namely urban terror, you know, the guerrillas coming into cities, natural catastrophes coming into cities. When I was a kid, we still saw pictures of Ethiopia with skinny cows standing in the countryside. That all is urban now. A new generation has actually grown up in extreme poverty in cities. And this is a challenge, I think, for our own good. We should not underestimate that also the fact that in urban environments, in cities, in those urban systems, that light also contributes greatly to safe and secure living. Because at the end of the day, it is again this lifetime, this safety that you can do something during your lifetime, in the years that you have got, in your most productive years, that is meaningful not only for yourself but to society. Here, for instance, you see a few kids playing in front of a wall covered with gunshots from gangs. They have shootouts in the night at the same territory where the kids are playing during the day. So the dichotomy of good and bad, black and white, light and shadow doesn't work anymore. We have it all intervened. It is overfolding. And the people that live in those areas, many of them are just people like you and myself. You know, they are just people, you see them a few face shots. Those are people in neighborhoods, people that we got to know and we became friends with in those areas while developing the projects. And what this girl says here in the neighborhood, Emilia, is actually what you call a barrio, I call my home. And we shouldn't underestimate that this idea in mostly non-democratic societies, that this is them and this is us. I'm talking about these two sides of the same coin that we find in cities, that we have to overcome this. And I like to say that the barrio, this favela, this idea of the slum is mostly in our heads. It's not really in those neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods actually having a lot of qualities that we believe also our cities, that we are very proud in building every day, could learn from. Because if you look around you, most cities that are developed right now, and you all have heard that the Chinese government decreed to urbanize 250 million people, again, an abstract number, but I help you out. This is like 25 Mumbais. So the Chinese government has decided to urbanize 25 Mumbais. That maybe sounds better, or you can use for that case New York or any other city. That's actually a smaller one than 25 million. It's a massive process, and it's going on while we sit here. Lots of illumination necessary, certainly, but as that is happening, we have to be actually prepared, because we shouldn't replicate what we already have in our shelves, but we have to think very hard to create this sort of environment for a better and a more comfortable life. But first and foremost, what is this environment actually about? I showed you already the people, and I show you the prototype, the original housing prototype of Corbusier. Actually, it celebrated its 100th birthday. A sketch made on a kitchen table about that size on a piece of transparent paper. It's the, let's say, the seed of the modern movement. A house without walls. It was actually built for Belgian villages shelled by German grenades, so people could fill the walls with the rubble of the villages and create a new life for themselves and for their families. An interesting idea, because millions, literally millions of people have the same idea in the slum areas of the global south. This is quite interesting. It seems to come natural to us. And you see it here, again, a picture of Petare. We like to say this is not a mountain full of houses, but actually a house the size of a mountain, and you can count yourself the floors this house has. So there are other models. There's modernism crashing and overlapping together with those informal, with those urban vernacular settlements, and there are towers like the Torre David. And before I go into the toolbox, in our urban toolbox, I like to show you this study on Torre David that we have entertained over a couple of years actually. And despite the fact that you might have read that this torre is in the meantime emptied, people still live there because they were sent to houses outside of the city and they just came back a week later. So interesting enough, this is actually the example, the biggest squat in the world, as we like to call it, a giant standing in the middle of the city, a result of mismanagement, if you want so, but also for us, an interesting laboratory. Why? Because everybody would tell you that a tower, this Torre David, is the basis of having such a tower needs equipment. It needs technical equipment. Again, science, technology has provided us with that, right? Otis invented the elevator, hence we can build skyscrapers. Skyscrapers have facades, they have air conditioning, they have obviously electrical systems, and so forth. Black water, white water, pumps, etc., filled with infrastructure. I can guarantee you this building has very little or none of that. And if it has systems, they actually have been replaced by human bodies, literally. There's no elevator in this tower, but there are more than 7,000 people living inside. And I'd like to invite you to see and understand a little bit what's going on inside the tower. So, 46 floors of this tower, half of it is filled with people, and we were very interested about the ingenuity, about the way in which people actually find their way around it. How are people actually moving around it? How are the stocks and flows? How do people come from one floor to the other? Do they have services? It is actually a model which is an anti-modern model. It is a structure, skeleton, just like the domino house, but it has been filled by content. It is not a formal exercise, it is actually a content exercise, because people who had no idea what this tower was planned for, a hotel, a bank headquarters, a couple of other programs, they have moved into this building and created their own livelihood. Sometimes quite sophisticated, sometimes very improvised, but always fit to their budget and fit to their needs. We looked inside it where stores have been founded. This is a rooftop gym, etc. All of that exists in the tower, and even if that looks like an exercise, a window in the world which is far away, we are doing the same thing in our cities every day. We're transforming them, we're reprogramming them, we're doing actually something different with it than it was planned for. Just if you look at it compressed in a very short lifetime, in a very short lifespan, it suddenly becomes an amazing, interesting, exhilarating exercise. If you like to find out more about it, there's a book that came out with Lars Müller, but I want to tell you a little bit more about the project itself. So the tower in red in the center of the building is actually standing, and we looked at our boundary, at our research boundary. It's standing in the middle of the city. There are actually services. There are services on the street, but not services in the building. And you might think, how would you even think about moving in such a building if you have to walk up 20, 40, 30 floors? So I can guarantee you that it's not really a problem, because the house, the side of a hill, confronts you with a similar challenge. You also have to walk up 20, 30, 40 floors. So this sort of squat is quite comfortable. And as you can see, the man with the cast on his foot is smiling because he knows in a few minutes there will be 3 or 4 guys showing up who carry him down to the sidewalk. So again, I think the capacity that actually social networks, social structures can literally replace mechanical structures is an exercise we should learn from. A store that has been built on the 10th floor with a hole that connects to the neighboring parking structures where people can drive up with motorbikes and deliver goods into the tower. Again, an electricity distribution, makeshift. If I say makeshift, all the engineers in this room might get a heart attack seeing how that looks in reality. But as simulated or as improvised as it looks like, it works. It actually gives you opportunities to live in the middle of the city with a very little budget, to have an affordable housing, something that architects in the last 50 years have hardly achieved in Europe. That is exactly the reason why you have barrios and slums in cities, because there's no affordable housing. There's a whole industry out there, but nobody has managed to produce that product. The same problem, again, replicated in Asia, in China, right now as we speak, by the millions, in this process of urbanizing 250 million people. There will be a lot of people who will build those cities, but they will not find a place in those cities. And we have a few ideas what to do about it. And obviously this research-based project that also resulted again in an exhibition in AEDES in Berlin, a place which is since a long time, as I understand, supported by Zumtobel, which also shows, I would say, a non-direct interest not only in the arts but also in the architecture and what is going on in the world, has also led us to make an exhibition which was also shown there. But I think I'm in half time now, so I like to show you a few applications, a few projects, because we're not only a think tank, we're also a do tank. And we have a few ideas also what you could do in cities, and I've picked three. Some are already a little bit older, others are newer, that I would like to share with you. So here's the metro cable project, which I always like to show here in Bregenz, because there's another company next door. It only shows the productivity of the people here in Vorarlberg. If you go skiing, you probably used one of those Doppelmayr metro cables. What it looks like actually is that I mentioned before the house the size of a mountain. We said to ourselves, this mountain also needs an elevator. And we installed such a system, and that sounds now very like a quick pro comment, but it took us a while. But in a very early sketch that came out on the Harvard Design magazine, it already showed everything what it is about. It is actually turning the mountain around, bringing people massively up to the top of the hill, and then they can trickle down the mountain. Not only people, construction materials and other goods. And why is that? I already mentioned to you the people in Torre David. They have no problem in walking upstairs because they walk upstairs in those barrios and favelas too. And this is how it looks like. And when it rains, it looks more or less like this. So you can imagine what it means for those people to have access to electricity, to have access to transportation, to drinking water, to all of that. Because our usual reaction to the problem, you all know that the line, for a man with a hammer in his hand, every problem looks like a nail. I would say to most people and to most engineers, transportation engineers, the solution would be a road. You see here on the left, that was one drawing of this particular project to bring accessibility to San Agustin, to this mountain. But when people saw this plan, just look at the lady here on the bottom right, she realized her house is gone because the road is going on top of the house. So you can imagine that people were not that happy. 33% of the people would lose in the process of constructing the road their houses. So this was the moment for us to propose this sort of metro cable system, as it is now a household name, first built in Medellin, then in Caracas, in the meantime in many other places in Bolivia and in Brazil, as feeder lines for a subway that you see here on the bottom. So it's not only a merry-go-round, it's connected to a transport system. And we believe this is exactly the spirit of engagement. An impact of design, that you do something which is not driven by creating a form, but by creating a content where the people, the physical environment, and whatever you can add to it are actually in a meaningful relationship to each other, and where they really change in a positive way with a high impact the livelihood of people. You see here still the stair going up, illuminated, but that is now rather used for going down than going up, which you can imagine is a big difference, even to bring cargo. If you slide it down, if you bring it down, rather than carrying it up. It has turned around literally the life for about 40,000 people living in this neighborhood. And I go to the next project just by showing you a few stills. This station was highly criticized for its fanciness, but I can tell you we only chose the best materials because this is the station with the biggest frequency of customers, and we saw that there's no argument for using inferior materials in a station that has more customers than any other metro station in the city. So that only to that, and I can guarantee you also that driving that cable car is really making fun, and life changes really the life on this mountain. So second project, this is the vertical gym. I actually put it inside. Most people would tell you that it is impossible to provide sports areas in the barrios of Caracas. They're very dense, buildings up to 5 floors high, in steep hills. There's very little area that you could even use for sports. So to organize the sports areas vertically, just like the houses grew, first spreading out horizontally and then put one floor over the other, was at the end our inspiration. We pack 3,800 square meters that allow those 15,000 visitors to have those sports areas available. 15,000 people.
It's not really about the aesthetics of a building, but it's about building a social consciousness that we have to build an environment for everyone in the city.
15,000 people every month. I'm sure the Kunsthaus Bregenz would be happy about those numbers, but it's really about the numbers in those cities. And I can tell you that it's also changing your way in looking at architecture. And at this moment, also thanks to the jury, I know there are a lot of the people here, and thanks to Zumtobel, it got the second prize, but we were still very proud to be part of the Zumtobel award last year, 2014. But it makes little sense to tell you about it if you don't know how the situation looked before. This is a typical sports field in a barrio. There's actually a chapel where people sit on top, and it's this intersection where you saw the wall with the shot holes before. This is the same place. So this is the gym for people. And you can probably understand that there's a lot more going on than only playing basketball, because those kids actually grow up into gangs because they have no meaningful other pastime than shooting drugs rather than balls. A basketball court down at the corner, and a typical small football pitch inside a barrio. So this system, which is open source, if you have anybody who wants one, we give the plans out for free. We actually gave it to the mayor of Rio, where we're building with the Swiss government at the moment the Swiss Olympic gym as one donation to the mayor of Rio, because believe it or not, Rio is carrying out the World Olympics, but schools have no sports fields. So I guess we will see more people out on the street demonstrating for that. But there are answers to it, and I think we all, in collaboration with locals, in collaboration with people who really know because they live there, they are actually the experts. We should harder and better think what the solutions for those situations can be. This is the Empower Shack project, and it is really about an empowerment both through architecture but also through the people who live again in those neighborhoods. If I say Empower Shack, I'm bringing you into Kailicha, into a township in Cape Town, right behind the Table Mountain. There's a sort of an area which is sand blown in from the sea over a huge territory of land, and this is how people live there. This lady already got a light bulb because she's actually living in one of our houses. And you will see this house is actually made out of corrugated iron. I can tell you it's not very comfortable, it's hot inside. It has a lot of disadvantages, but it is a little bit better than the houses that already exist. And this is exactly the spirit that we have taken on. We're not looking anymore for perfect solutions, because there are no perfect solutions for the larger majority of people living in cities. There is no perfect solution. You can assist, you can make things better, and you can create a bigger velocity of learning and adopting solutions, of sharing them and improving your own life, maybe with your own resources. But we need examples, build examples. Not examples only in the book or in a lecture like here, but we need them in the field. And this is why we went to the PT section, to Galicia. We looked on the ground at the situation of the houses that you have there. This is Pumeso. He's actually half blind. He was working on a construction site without any protective gear, and he lost his eyesight with his family, and the house sits right in the sand. So if it rains, the floor is literally mud. And this is how all the houses in the PT section look like, and in Galicia. So the improvement, as simple and as basic as it seems, was to elevate the ground 55 centimeters, to put on the same land a smaller house, but with 2 floors. So net, the man has more square meters on smaller land, because it is not only about the house, it is actually about a sort of an urban plan for more than 100 houses. And I show you how the house is built. It's built in 24 hours, because people have no interest to be without a house. They have no trust. They've actually waited for 25 years for the house that Nelson Mandela promised every one of them, and they're sitting in those shacks, and they will probably wait another 25 years. So this is actually a perfect opportunity to get your hands dirty, to look at the materials that already exist in South Africa, in the hardware store just around the corner, rather accessible, and how to build yourself, perhaps over time, 1 or 2 of those floors. As I told you, together with the resources that are available in a community. This is the PT section, figuring out how smaller houses allow for more space and distance between them, creating public space, but public space that is at the moment without illumination, a big security risk. What they did is actually, the government put the same lamp system like in prisons, 40-meter high lamp masts with very strong light. This is illuminating in the night the neighborhood for security. We believe, together with Zumtobel, we could do better. This is actually a laboratory for that, to find out how that can work and how we can create in this sort of swapping and finding out who lives where and what sort of quality spaces we can create, together with a sort of a confident building process. So nobody is left for 3 weeks somewhere. The house is built in 24 hours. The furniture is out on the street. The house is built up together with neighbors, and the result, maybe you have the picture in mind from before, is this: an area with neighborhoods, with family clans, with privatized areas that sort of define that space, and with people who suddenly go into the construction industry. So they not only have a new house, they get a new job, and looking at the size of the townships in South Africa, there's a lot to do. So my last pictures, I wanted to show you that there's also not far away in South Africa or in South America challenges. This is a playground which was done with the Fundación Enrique Miralles, a small playground, but I put it in here just as a goodbye to show you that playgrounds need actually weather protection and light, and then you can use them 24 hours, and a lot of more people will use them, and they can also be great places for everything. And I hope to see you, and with this I close, on the 4th of December at the Shenzhen Biennale that we're curating at the moment. Thank you very much for your interest.